At 7:20 a.m. Thursday morning, August 7th, two tankers, the Graham and the SS Gulfoil, collided off fog-shrouded Newport, Rhode Island. Because of the fog and the confusion aboard the ships, it was fully 25 minutes before word of the disaster was made public. At 7:45 a.m., WBZ-TV News learned of the crash. Immediately, photographer Bill Quinn and Andy Sherrard of the Cape Cod area were dispatched to the area by Denny Whitmarsh, WBZ-TV News editor, Arch McDonald ready to bulletin for air use. While Sherrard drove to Newport, where he chartered a boat, Quinn flew to Newport Harbor. The weather was still too thick for photography, so he hired a helicopter and hovered over the area until he found a hole in the fog. At the Brighton Marine Hospital, a WBZ-TV cameraman got these scenes of survivors as they were flown in for surgery and hospitalization. On-the-spot stories and interviews by beepers were aired as bulletins on WBZ-TV, while Bill Quinn and his helicopter pilot dropped below the fog for some amazing shots. This sensational pass of the Whirlybird was practically at deck level of the burning SS Gulfoil. From now on, it was a race with time to get the film on the air. As the film is processed, WBZ-TV News editors write the story. WBZ-TV producers and engineers worked together to prepare the program. Just 7 hours after the collision, the films were aired on WBZ-TV, scooping the Boston area. Using every production facility available, UP and local film, UP facsimile service, live appearances of people in the news, beeper reports, taped on-the-spot interviews, videotapes, rear screen projections, and so forth, WBZ-TV provides the fastest, most complete service possible to its coverage area with a total of 53 regularly scheduled news programs each week. Analysis, interview series, news bulletins, and special shows complement these. Jack Chase is the morning man with the programs Monday through Friday at 6:45, 7:25, 8:25, 9:25 a.m., and again at 12 noon. Each of these programs is followed by weather reports from WBZ-TV staff meteorologist Don Kent. Each weekday, Streeter Stewart reports at 2:25 p.m. Arch McDonald's on hand at 6:45 Monday through Saturday evenings. At 11 p.m., Victor Best is the reporter, and finally we sign off with New England Tonight. WBZ-TV's weekend news coverage is handled by Dick Tucker at noon, and Art Amadon Saturdays and Sundays at 11 p.m. In addition, on Sundays at 12:15 p.m., there's a weekly roundup of local news, News in Review. There is also the weekly series starring the editors, an analysis of the top local issues by Boston editors, moderated by Irwin D. Cannon of the Christian Science Monitor. To film news wherever and whenever it happens, WBZ-TV has one photographer on staff. WBZ-TV producer Phil Galligan covers special assignments in depth. In the last 2 months of 1958, Phil traveled more than 13,000 miles to Florida for guided missile testings, to Nova Scotia to cover a mine disaster, to Rome for the investiture of Boston's Cardinal Cushing. Our news operation is built around the Stringer system. There are 91 camera correspondents in the New England area on the lookout for news film stories for WBZ-TV. Most Stringers have shortwave receivers in their cars or homes. Frequently, our first tip on a story comes from one of them who is already on his way to cover the story. Two of our Stringers, Dick and Al Smilgas, have specially rigged cars, the trunks of which are filled with batteries and radio receivers. Auxiliary generators are built in under the hood. Prezzo lights, self-powered, portable spotlights, mobile phones, and police, state police and fire department receivers complete their equipment. Between them, they get most of the fires, police action, and accidents that occur in the pre-dawn hours. In New Hampshire, Dick and Madeline Henn, a husband and wife team from Manchester, specialize in offbeat news. Dick actually entered the cage to shoot these films of an animal trainer breaking in a leopard act. In western Massachusetts, stringer Matt Grimaldi shot this air tragedy when a jet tanker bound non-stop for London crashed on the takeoff at Westover, killing 15 mostly newsmen who were covering the flight. On Cape Cod, William Quinn speeds over dunes and beaches on his four-wheel drive Jeep. Bill, who shot the films of the flaming tankers at Newport, flew into fog-shrouded Nantucket Island the following week to get films of a northeast plane crash when one of the worst disasters in New England aeronautical history had taken the lives of 21 holiday-bound vacationers. In the WBZ-TV newsroom, editors Denny Whitmarsh, John Luttrell, Jack Chase, and Arch McDonald, the latter two doubling as on-the-air personalities, prepare our newscasts. This, then, is the way the WBZ-TV news department works, and here are some of the results. At 11:52 on a mild January day, two jet planes on a routine training flight collided in the skies over Arlington, a suburb of Boston. One of the planes crashed in the backyard, killing the two pilots who had stayed aboard, trying to guide the disabled craft beyond that thickly populated area. Almost simultaneously, the other plane crashed in the neighboring town of Winchester, setting two homes afire. WBZ-TV newsman Streeter Stewart, whose home was in the Arlington area, was at the scene immediately. He shot this film, raced to the station, and wrote his own story to accompany the film, which was aired on the 2:25 news, 2.5 hours after the crash. The films were complemented by beeper reports from people who had witnessed the actual crash. The evening news featured 8mm film shot by a pilot, an amateur cameraman, who while flying to Boston had filmed one of the jet pilots as he parachuted into Boston Bay. A couple of stories keep appearing in the news which were of national import and of a special local interest. Bernard Goldfein, Boston industrialist, and Sherman Adams, White House counselor, suddenly became as inseparable in the mind of the public as Rogers and Hammerstein. The fate of the old colony line of the New Haven Railroad was argued, decided, reconsidered, and postponed with persistent regularity. It was discussed with vehemence and emotion by those who depended on the railroad line daily, and with no less knowledgeability by those who weren't quite sure exactly what area the colony serviced. A WBZ-TV cameraman recorded what was presumed to be the farewell run of the old colony. The panel on starring the editors discussed the many proposals and alternatives at length, and a special WBZ-TV telecast by Governor Foster Berkalow, outlining his plan to save the line, kept our viewers apprised of what was taking place at all times. 1958 may have seen the last pre-primary conventions of the Republican and Democratic parties of Massachusetts. Knowing this, WBZ-TV was most anxious to cover these conventions fully for its viewers. The GOP pre-primary convention was recorded on sound on film, and a special half-hour show of its highlights was presented. Factions within the Democratic Party, however, did not want the Democrats' convention covered and made every effort to block our attempts to film it. On the day before the convention, a representative of WBZ-TV spoke before the Democrats' pre-primary convention rules committee, urging that they amend their rules to provide sound-on-film coverage of the convention similar to that given to the Republicans. The rules were so amended, the convention was covered, and a lively half-hour of highlights of the Democrats' pre-primary convention resulted. WBZ-TV climaxed its coverage of the various political campaigns on election night with complete returns. Remote camera crews at Democrat and Republican headquarters recorded the excitement in those centers for live inserts during our coverage. A cause of great excitement in Boston was the elevation of Archbishop Richard Cushing to Cardinal. WBZ-TV film and live remote TV cameras covered the departure of Cardinal Cushing, Cardinal O'Hara, and Cardinal Cicognani for Rome, as more than 10,000 of the Cardinal's friends waited for hours despite the frigid, wintry winds at Logan Airport to see them off. Earlier, WBZ-TV's Phil Galligan and Father Walter Flaherty of the Archdiocese of Boston had flown to Rome to meet Westinghouse Broadcasting Washington correspondent Rod McLeish. As Galligan filmed the many ceremonies of the Cardinals' consistories, McLeish and Father Flaherty sent back beeper reports and taped interviews for use in our news programs. A half-hour documentary will be put together of these films and tapes as a follow-up to the news stories. A number of stories stand out, not because they were the most important stories of the year, but because of their unexpected nature. They were doubly dramatic. Phil Galligan was driving to work one morning when this motorist went off the road, plunged into the icy Charles River. Galligan raced down the bank in time to capture these amazing rescue pictures. When Fats Bucelli, a racketeer long suspected of being a member of the Brinks gang, was murdered, a WBZ-TV stringer received a tip. He was in time to get these exclusive films of Bucelli's arrival at the hospital where he was pronounced dead. When a very effective series of news films was shot by WBZ-TV cameramen working with the Boston Juvenile Squad. Every one of these weapons, from razor-sharpened buckles and tire chains to switch knives and a .45 automatic, was taken from Boston teenagers. The Boston Police Juvenile Squad is striking at the heart of delinquency by prosecuting parents who neglect their children. This woman was arrested for drunkenness, but her apartment, a breeding ground for delinquency, told of far worse potential crimes. The woman's grandchildren were huddled against each other for warmth. Their own mother was serving a prison term for unarmed robbery. These children were abandoned in Boston. They begged food from the neighbors by day and slept on the floor and in the midst of filth and decay. A number of fires made our news programs. These are some of the more destructive ones. This, the Merchants and Miners Pier Fire. This Gloucester Hotel was but one in a long series of fires which had kept that area in terror. The deaths of three major figures in Massachusetts politics were well covered by WBZ-TV. The first was that of Paul Dever, former governor of Massachusetts and one of the strongest voices in the state's Democrat Party. On Labor Day weekend, death claimed Republican gubernatorial candidate George Fingold, throwing the party into utter turmoil and confusion as they began the search for someone else to oppose Governor Berkalow in his bid for re-election. A special half-hour obituary was telecast. When James Michael Curley died, a whole era of politics died with him. The blind devotion and hatred which Boston factions felt for this Irish American who had fought his way from the shadowed slums of Boston to the very shadow of the White House were dimmed not a whit by death. Old stories, real and imagined, were again rampant about this man who was completely self-made and self-destroyed. On the evening of his death, WBZ-TV televised a special program hosted by Irwin D. Cannon, editor of the Christian Science Monitor, and written by WBZ-TV newsman John Luttrell, which highlighted the stormy career of Curley and featured a number of prominent Bostonians who had been his contemporaries, both those who had worked with him and some who had fought against him. These are but samples of the variegated news stories that keep WBZ-TV #1 in the area and show how our stringers, our newscasters, our editors all work as an efficient, well-coordinated fact-finding team. In addition to the big stories, the important happenings, some news films are memorable for their visual impact. Phil Galligan illustrated a poem which sang of the exhilarating experience only pilots know. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of.